Dawn broke cold over Flagstaff. In the misty Coconino woods, a former U.S. Marine named Brody Tanner caught a sound most people would have missed, a faint, stifled whimper. He froze, instincts honed by years of service sharpening instantly. Pushing through damp ferns and thorny underbrush, he found the source. A German shepherd, tied cruelly to a young maple sapling, its muzzle bound with filthy cloth, its fur streaked with scars that looked carved by neglect. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a car door slammed shut. Whoever had done this was leaving, their cruelty echoing in that metallic thud. In that instant, Brody faced a choice: keep walking or step into danger. What followed would strip away the velvet lies hiding in Flagstaff's hills and prove that mercy could still change a life. Before we begin, where are you watching from? If you believe that no soul, human or animal, should ever be abandoned, stay with this story. It might just restore your faith in miracles. The mornings over Flagstaff, Arizona, often arrived softly. Sunlight filtered through the towering pines and the snow-dusted peaks of San Francisco Mountain. But that morning was different. The light came thin and pale, dragging the chill of dawn with it. The air smelled of wet soil and pine resin, that scent that lingers for days on coats and boots. Wisps of fog drifted between the trees like slow breath, as though the forest itself hadn't yet decided to wake. Through that silent landscape walked Brody Tanner, his breath forming fleeting clouds in the frigid air. Brody was in his late 30s, tall, lean, and cut with the discipline of a soldier. Years in the Marines had carved a precision into every movement. His short chestnut hair carried streaks of gray at the temples, not from vanity, but from experience. His face was rugged and strong, with a jaw set in quiet determination and eyes the color of steel. They revealed a man who had seen too much: deserts, jungles, and loss. Though his posture spoke of strength, there was something else in the way he moved, a tiredness, the kind that comes from leaving too much of yourself behind in foreign lands. He wore a flannel shirt under a worn field jacket, mud-crusted boots, and a canvas backpack that held a compass, knife, rope, and flask, his standard gear for wandering alone through the wilderness. He wasn't here for adventure. He'd come for silence, to let the stillness of the woods smooth out the edges of his thoughts. But fate had other intentions. At first, the sound was almost nothing, so faint it could have been the wind whispering through pine needles. Then it came again, a choked whine, the kind of noise that carried pain. Brody stopped. His boots pressed into frozen soil as he tilted his head, listening. Years of combat had taught him to tell real distress from imagination. This wasn't an echo or trick of the forest. Something, or someone, was suffering nearby. Instinct took over. He crouched low, his body lowering into a stance that minimized noise and shadow. His breathing slowed, visible vapor fading with each controlled exhale. He moved forward soundlessly, eyes scanning the brush. Then, the cry came again, weaker now but undeniably alive. Brody parted a curtain of wet ferns and stepped into a small clearing. There, in the half-light, stood a young maple tree, its trunk quivering under the weight tied to it. The dog. A German shepherd, maybe 3 years old. Its coat, once a proud sable, was now dulled with grime and frost. Its body trembled beneath a rope wound so tight that red welts marred the fur. Its muzzle was sealed shut by a strip of filthy cloth, forcing its cries into strangled whimpers. And those eyes, amber, wide, and broken. They met Brody's with a mix of terror and fading hope. There was no hostility left in them, only exhaustion. Brody's chest tightened. He had seen cruelty before, in places where the weak were discarded like waste. And he knew exactly what he was looking at. The trembling wasn't just cold, it was fear carved deep into muscle and memory. Without a word, Brody lowered himself slowly, palms open, voice steady, the same voice he once used to calm frightened recruits in the field. "Easy now," he murmured. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Easy." The shepherd flinched but didn't snarl. It only pressed itself tighter against the tree as if wishing to disappear. Brody slipped a hand into his jacket pocket, drew out a folding knife, and flipped the blade open with a soft click. He worked carefully, cutting the rope first, then loosening the knots around the dog's legs. Each slice released a faint creak of fibers, and with it, a breath of relief. When the tension gave way, the dog slumped forward, half from weakness, half from freedom. Brody removed the cloth from its muzzle. The shepherd coughed, jaw flexing as it tested the air. A weak, almost questioning sound escaped its throat. Without thinking, Brody took off his jacket and wrapped it around the animal's shivering body. The heavy fabric engulfed it, but warmth began to seep in. Beneath the fur, his hands felt old scars, burns and cuts that spoke of a long history of pain. His stomach clenched. Then, the silence broke again. A distant car door slammed, metallic and final. Brody froze. Every nerve tensed. Whoever had abandoned this creature had only just left. They could be nearby, watching. Years of instinct told him standing still was a mistake. He moved swiftly, gathering the shepherd into his arms. Though the dog was not light, Brody bore the weight easily. The animal whimpered, then nestled its head against his chest, as though surrendering to safety. He avoided the main trail, choosing instead a dry stream bed where footprints would fade among stones and moss. The mist coiled thickly around them, swallowing sound and shape until the forest itself seemed to protect them. Behind them, the maple stood silent, a witness to cruelty. Ahead, there was uncertainty, but also a fragile thread of redemption binding man and dog together. By the time Brody reached the forest's edge, the sun had lifted, spilling orange light across the distant rooftops of Flagstaff. Chimneys exhaled lazy smoke trails into the crisp morning air. His cabin waited at the outskirts, a modest wooden structure he'd built with his own hands after returning from service. The porch leaned with age, the chimney slanted, but the place stood firm, a quiet fortress for a weary soul. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, carried the dog inside, and set it gently on the rug near the hearth. The Marine in him moved with automatic purpose. He stoked the coals in the fireplace until flames caught, then fetched water from a canister, heating it in a metal pot. Kneeling beside the dog, he cleaned the raw marks on its chest and legs, wiping away grime and blood with the same care he'd once used on wounded comrades. The shepherd flinched but didn't resist. Its amber eyes followed every movement, torn between fear and the dawning realization that this man meant no harm. Brody cooked a small bowl of soft oats, cooled them, and slid it toward the dog. At first, it only sniffed, hesitant, then licked, once, twice, and began to eat in fragile, desperate bites. Brody exhaled, relief softening his face. "That's it. You're going to be all right." He studied the animal in the glow of the fire, the ribs faint beneath its coat, the scars hidden beneath new shadows. Broken, yes. But not beyond saving. When night came, he covered the shepherd with his spare blanket. His gaze fell on a battered collar tag still hanging from its neck, most of the letters scratched away. Only two remained, E and O. Echo, he whispered softly. Yeah. Echo. The name felt right, something lost, now found. Echo stirred, ears twitching as if answering. And for the first time in years, Brody Tanner allowed himself a small, tired smile. By dawn's first light, the frost had feathered the cabin windows white. Brody Tanner woke stiff in the chair beside the fire, his body aching but his mind clear. On the rug near the hearth, the shepherd, Echo, slept curled beneath the blanket, his breathing even at last. When Brody reached out, the dog's tail gave a slow, uncertain thump against the floor. That small gesture was enough. He knew what he had to do next. A few hours later, Brody had wrapped Echo carefully in a makeshift sling made of canvas and an old towel. He loaded the dog into the front seat of his dented Ford pickup, the paint dulled by years of Arizona sun. The truck coughed to life, grumbling down the dirt track that led toward Flagstaff's main road. The drive was short but silent, the kind of silence that carried both gratitude and grief. Echo pressed weakly against the seat, eyes half open, shivering as sunlight began to seep through the trees. Brody's first stop was the Flagstaff Veterinary Clinic, a small building with white siding and a green awning, perched between a bakery and an auto shop. Inside, it smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine cleaner. Dr. William Harker looked up from his paperwork as Brody stepped in. He was in his mid-50s, his once blonde hair thinning, his glasses resting halfway down his nose. His manner was calm, the kind of man who could soothe a frightened animal just by standing nearby. When his eyes fell on Echo, his composure wavered. "My God," he murmured, pushing aside his notes and standing. "What happened to him?" "Found him tied up in the forest," Brody replied, voice low but steady. "Looked like whoever left him meant for him not to survive." Harker's mouth set in a grim line. "Bring him in." The exam room glowed beneath bright fluorescent light. Echo trembled on the metal table, his nails scraping against the steel. Yet, he didn't growl or snap, just watched Brody, eyes flicking with fear and trust tangled together. Dr. Harker moved slowly, scanning the microchip with a handheld reader. The device beeped once. His brow furrowed. "He's registered," the vet said, adjusting his glasses. "The chip lists an owner, Roland family, Oakrest District. You know them?" Brody's jaw tensed. "By reputation. Everyone in Flagstaff did. John Roland, a property heir with more money than backbone, and his wife, Mara, a woman polished to perfection. Their estate sat high above town, all stone, glass, and carefully staged charity events. The kind of family whose smiles never reached their eyes." Harker kept examining the shepherd's scars, tracing them gently with gloved fingers. "These aren't new," he said quietly. "Some are months old. The pattern's consistent with tight restraints, maybe burns too. Whoever kept this dog did it often and without care." Brody's teeth clenched. He'd already guessed as much. But hearing it confirmed by a professional only made the anger burn deeper. He laid a hand on Echo's back, steadying himself as much as the dog. "Thanks, document. I'll take it from here." Harker nodded. "Be careful, Tanner. People like the Rolands, they don't take kindly to being exposed. News travels fast in a town like Flagstaff." By afternoon, whispers had already spread. A Marine had rescued a wounded shepherd linked to the Roland estate. And somewhere on the hill, Mara Roland began spinning her version of the truth. Tall, striking, and always immaculate, Mara was in her early 40s, her auburn hair coiled tight in a glossy twist, her lips painted the color of wine. She wore wealth-like armor, pearls, silk, and a scent of lilac that lingered too long. To her circle of admirers, she spoke with a voice of honeyed sorrow. "The poor creature went wild," she said with a sigh. "Bit one of the staff, ran off into the woods. I'm just thankful no one was seriously injured." Every word was measured, smooth and poisonous, a lie dressed in sympathy. Brody happened to be leaving the clinic just as the sound of sharp heels echoed across the parking lot. He turned, and there she was. Mara Roland. Her presence was like cold perfume. Wrapped in a fur-lined coat, she glided across the pavement with calculated grace. Behind her, a driver waited beside a sleek black sedan. Echo, resting beside Brody with a fresh bandage around his flank, stiffened the moment she appeared. His ears flattened, body shaking, a low growl rumbling from deep within his chest. Brody knelt instantly, steady hand on the dog's shoulder. "Easy, boy. She can't hurt you now." But Echo's reaction spoke volumes. It wasn't rage, it was pure, conditioned terror. Mara's eyes flicked briefly toward the trembling shepherd, then back to Brody. Her smile didn't falter, but her gaze sharpened like a blade. "Mr. Tanner, isn't it? I hear you found yourself quite the dangerous stray." "Dangerous animals," Brody said coolly, "don't usually get tied to trees and left for dead." Her laugh was light and rehearsed. "You misunderstand. That dog, Echo, was it? Has always been unstable. We tried to rehabilitate him, but some things can't be fixed. She sighed dramatically, gloved fingers touching her chest. You should be careful. You don't want to be responsible when he snaps again. Before Brody could respond, the scrape of metal drew his attention. An elderly man was raking leaves near the side garden, Mr. Kell, the Roland's longtime groundskeeper. His back was bent, his coat frayed, his movements deliberate. As Brody passed him, the old man muttered low, barely above a whisper. Dog barked at the garage day before he vanished. Wouldn't stop. Smelled fuel, he did. She dragged him away. Brody gave the faintest nod, not slowing his stride. Not the first time, Kell added softly. Fuel's been in that garage before. Brody's gut tightened. The words were quiet but heavy. They confirmed what his instincts already whispered, Echo hadn't just been mistreated. He'd uncovered something someone wanted hidden. Across the street, a curtain shifted. An elderly neighbor, Mrs. Whitcomb, peered from her window, her pale face framed by silver hair. She froze when Mara's gaze drifted her way, then quickly let the curtain fall. Fear had its own language, and Brody had learned to read it. He turned back down the driveway, leading Echo away from the mansion's stone walls. The dog's tail stayed tucked, his ears twitching with unease. The hill behind them felt too quiet. They hadn't gone far before Brody noticed it, the subtle rhythm of footsteps behind them. A car engine hummed briefly, then cut off. He didn't look back. Years of military training had taught him to trust the feeling first, the tightening of air, the weight of eyes on your back. Two men, moving in sync, trailing from a distance. Dark jackets. Caps low. The kind of men who blended into crowds by design. Brody adjusted his pace, changed stride patterns, stopped once to retie his boot. Each small move was deliberate, testing, confirming. The echo of their steps faltered for a second, then resumed. Keep close, Brody murmured under his breath. Echo obeyed, low growl vibrating against the leash. He turned sharply down a side road leading toward the volcanic fields, a stretch of broken black rock outside town. Rough terrain. Hard to follow. They moved fast. Boots whispering across jagged stone, breathing synchronized. Behind them, the sound of pursuit stumbled, untrained feet on unstable ground. Brody crouched behind a ridge, pressing a hand against Echo's back. The dog froze instantly, ears tuned to the dark. They waited, silent as ghosts. Minutes passed. Then, nothing. The footsteps were gone. Brody rose slowly, scanning the ridge one last time before leading Echo back toward the forest edge. Whoever those men were, they weren't just curious. Someone had paid them to keep watch. Echo stayed pressed to his side, muscles taut, amber eyes alert to every shadow. Yeah, boy, Brody muttered quietly. We're not imagining it. They're watching. And as the mist closed behind them, Brody knew one thing for certain, the truth behind Mara Roland's smile was far darker than anyone in Flagstaff dared to believe. The Flagstaff Police Department wasn't an imposing building, just a two-story block of brick and glass off LaRue Street. But inside, it hummed with quiet intensity, the steady clack of boots, the hum of radios, the low murmur of reports being filed. Brody Tanner pushed through the heavy glass doors, the winter air clinging to his jacket. At his side, Echo trotted on a short leash, tail low but alert. No one stopped them. Maybe it was the look in Brody's eyes, or maybe the quiet authority in his bearing, the kind of presence that told people this man didn't need permission to be here. Detective Jonah Briggs met him in the lobby. Briggs was in his mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy hair thinning at the temples and eyes like polished steel, sharp, assessing, and patient. His suit looked slept in, his tie half loosened, but there was no mistaking the discipline behind the fatigue. Mr. Tanner, Briggs greeted, his voice gravelly from too many nights of coffee and not enough sleep. Let's talk. He led Brody into a side office. The blinds were half drawn, dust collected in the corners, and a corkboard along one wall was covered with photos, notes, and scribbled leads. Echo curled at Brody's boots but kept one eye open, ever watchful. Brody spoke plainly. The forest rescue. The microchip linking Echo to the Rolands. Mara's reaction in the parking lot. And the shadowy men who had tailed him through the volcanic fields. Briggs listened in silence, hands steepled under his chin, his gaze flicking toward the dog only once, when Brody described the scars and the muzzle. When the story ended, the detective leaned back slowly, sighing through his nose. Mara Roland, he said, tone measured. Her name circled my desk before, charity fraud, missing donations, quiet settlements. But nothing's ever stuck. People like her paint overwrought with velvet. He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Thing is, suspicion doesn't get us convictions. I need something concrete. Photos. Audio. Documents. Something a judge can't laugh out of court. Brody nodded. I know where to start. The old Roland house on Maple Street, before they built the mansion in Oakrest. A friend of mine helped install cameras there years ago. If any data's still sitting on a hard drive, she can dig it up. Briggs raised an eyebrow. This friend have a name? Sierra Gwen, Brody replied. Trail maintenance crew. Knows wiring better than half the techs in this city. The detective studied him for a moment, then slid a card across the desk. You find anything, you bring it here, no hero stunts, Tanner. People like Mara don't scare. They get dangerous. Brody pocketed the card, gave a curt nod, and left without another word. Outside, the sky had turned a deep, metallic gray, clouds rolling over the San Francisco peaks like a curtain drawing across the town. The cold bit sharper now. Brody pulled his jacket tighter and headed east toward the maintenance yard near the forest's edge. He found Sierra Gwen crouched beside a pile of trail tools, coiling thick cable over her shoulder. She looked up when he approached. Sierra was in her early 30s, compact, wiry, and sun-bronzed from years outdoors. Her dark braid was tied loosely, and her brown eyes sparkled with curiosity even when her hands were smeared with grease. You don't usually show up unless something's broken, she said, smirking as she wiped her palms on her jeans. Trail washout again? Not this time, Brody replied. I need your help with a piece of old tech, security drives from the Roland's Maple Street house. Sierra's expression shifted, the humor fading. Roland? That family's poison, Brody. Everyone in town knows it, no one says it. She hesitated, then shrugged. Still. I've cracked older systems. Take me there. That afternoon, the clouds hung heavy but didn't break. Brody's truck rattled down the empty stretch of Maple Street, Echo curled quietly in the back seat, head resting on his paws. The old Roland house stood forgotten, shutters closed, paint peeling in long strips, a "for sale" sign half swallowed by weeds. Sierra worked the side door open with a screwdriver. It gave way with a soft click. The smell of dust and mildew rolled out. Inside, everything was ghostly, white sheets over furniture, the faint echo of laughter long since gone. The air felt heavy, like time itself had stopped here. Creepy, Sierra muttered. Brody said nothing. His focus was sharp. In what had once been the study, Sierra found the old security hub, tucked behind a false wall panel. A desktop tower, caked with grime. She pulled a portable reader from her backpack, slid the drive into it, and began typing furiously. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the tapping of keys and the faint hum of the laptop fan. Echo sat by Brody's leg, his ears flicking at every sound. Then Sierra exhaled sharply. Got something. The laptop screen flickered, grainy security footage, corrupted but not completely lost. A dim angle of the garage interior. The timestamp was nearly unreadable, but the image spoke for itself. A German shepherd, Echo, straining backward, collar taut, a hand gripping him roughly by the neck. The footage froze mid-motion. Sierra stared. It's blurry, but it's real. Enough to prove abuse. Brody's throat tightened. It's a start. Sierra shook her head. Courts won't move on a half-frame of static. But it tells us where to dig deeper. Brody nodded once. Then we dig. They left quietly, sliding the door shut behind them. The street outside was washed in dusky purple as evening crept in. Sierra turned to him as they reached the trucks. I'll clean the data and back it up tonight. You'll have it by morning. Appreciate it, Brody said. You sure you're ready for what this could turn up? Doesn't matter, he replied. What matters is the truth. Sierra gave a small, grim smile. You Marines. Always the same. She climbed into her truck and drove off, leaving Brody and Echo alone beneath the fading light. As they turned down the block, a figure appeared near the corner, thin, hunched, wrapped in a heavy cardigan. Mrs. Whitcomb, the neighbor from across the street. Her gray bun had come half undone, and her trembling hands clutched something metallic. She glanced around nervously before hurrying toward them. I shouldn't, she whispered, voice shaking. But it's gone on too long. She pressed something into Brody's palm, a brass key, old and worn smooth by years of use. Her eyes glistened. You want the truth? It's under the curved stair. That's where she hid it. Where no one would think to look. Before Brody could speak, she turned and shuffled quickly back to her house, the curtain falling once more behind her. Brody looked down at the key, its weight solid and cold in his hand. Beside him, Echo gave a low growl, a deep, uneasy sound that seemed to echo the weight of secrets buried in stone and wood. The last light of day faded behind the peaks. And in the silence that followed, Brody Tanner knew the next step would take him straight into the heart of darkness. The Roland house on Maple Street looked even more forsaken under moonlight. Thin fog rolled across the overgrown yard, the wind rattling loose shutters against cracked siding. The place carried a weight, the kind of silence that pressed against the ribs, heavy and watchful. Brody Tanner parked a block away, his old Ford tucked into the shadows of a pine stand. He checked his watch, close to midnight. The town slept, but his pulse stayed sharp and alert. At his side, Sierra Gwen adjusted the strap of her backpack, tools clinking softly inside. You sure about this? She whispered. Could just hand the key to Briggs, let him handle it. Brody's reply came low and steady. If we wait, someone will make sure whatever's inside that house disappears. We go now. Between them padded Echo, the German shepherd. His ears flicked at every sound, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through brittle leaves. He'd healed enough to move confidently now, his gait steady though his ribs still showed in the moonlight. Back door? Sierra asked. Brody gave a faint nod. We'll take the side entry. Less chance of being seen. Sierra grinned, a spark of nerves and mischief in her eyes. You Marines always like the front lines. Me, I prefer a quiet entry. The side door's lock yielded after a few careful turns of Sierra's screwdriver. The hinges groaned as the door swung inward, the sound of stale air rushing out. Inside, it smelled of mildew, old varnish, and something faintly metallic, like forgotten coins. The house felt frozen in time. Furniture sat beneath yellowed sheets, a thin film of dust blurring every surface. Their footsteps creaked across warped floorboards as they moved down the hall, beams of their small flashlights gliding over faded portraits and cobwebbed corners. Echo's claws clicked softly as he sniffed along the baseboards, occasionally pausing to glance back at Brody, ever watchful, ever ready. At the foot of the curved staircase, Brody stopped. The moonlight filtered through a cracked window, casting pale stripes across the floor. The brass key Mrs. Whitcomb had given him felt heavy in his pocket, almost humming with purpose. He crouched and ran his fingers along the underside of the third step. The wood was uneven, one seam slightly misaligned. "There," Sierra whispered, kneeling beside him. Brody slid the key into the narrow gap. A faint click echoed. With gentle pressure, the panel lifted, revealing a hidden compartment no larger than a shoebox. Inside sat a small tin container, rusted and dented at the edges. Brody lifted it out, brushing the dust away. Echo whined softly, nose twitching toward the box as if he sensed something buried deeper than just paper and metal. They carried it into the study, setting it on an old desk draped in a stained sheet. Sierra pulled out her multi-tool and pried at the lid until it gave. Inside were bundles of aged documents, tied with brittle ribbon. The faint scent of perfume clung to them, faint but unmistakably feminine. Brody untied the first bundle. A leather-bound journal lay on top, its cover cracked from age. He opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, a woman's script. Sierra leaned close, reading over his shoulder. "Fear of Mara grows stronger each day. She insists Echo be trained out of his instincts. He knows too much. If John refuses to see, I must act before it's too late." Sierra looked up, her face pale. "That's the first wife's handwriting, isn't it? People said she died in an accident." Brody nodded grimly. "That's what the report said." He turned the pages. Between diary entries were bank statements, withdrawal slips, all showing large sums missing just before supposed home renovations. None of them matched any legitimate expense. One receipt bore Mara Roland's signature, dated just weeks before the so-called garage fire that had claimed the first wife's life. Under the journal lay a stack of invoices marked Professional Canine Reconditioning Services. Sierra scanned them, her brow furrowing. These aren't normal training records. Behavior suppression, scent desensitization, submission reinforcement, this was abuse, dressed up as therapy. Brody's jaw tightened. Echo whimpered faintly, as if the words themselves carried memories too painful to forget. They continued sorting through the pile. Near the bottom, Sierra found a folded sheet of garage service reports, edges smeared with grease. One line caught her attention immediately. "Fuel leak near lower valve. Owner declined repair. Noted risk of ignition if exposed." At the bottom was a hastily scribbled note in an unfamiliar hand. "Do not let Echo near the garage." Brody stared at the page for a long moment. "So it wasn't an accident," he muttered. "It was planned." Sierra looked up at him. "She killed her. Or tried to hide something worse," Brody said quietly. He reached once more into the tin box and found something tucked along the side, a small scrap of fabric, stiff and faded, faintly perfumed. As soon as he lifted it, Echo's body went rigid. The dog's hackles rose, lips curling into a silent snarl, a low growl vibrating deep in his chest. Brody dropped to one knee beside him. "Easy, boy," he whispered, hand steady on Echo's back. "It's over. You're safe now." The fabric carried Mara's scent, even after all these years. Echo's reaction said what the evidence already suggested: she was the source of his fear, the architect of his pain. Sierra exhaled shakily. "This is enough to bury her in court. Especially with Briggs involved." Brody nodded. "We'll take it all to him in the morning." But before he could close the tin, his phone vibrated, the sudden light of the screen startling against the dark. He lifted it, shielding the glow with his palm. An anonymous text message blinked across the screen. "Bring the dog to Horseshoe Creek tonight. Come alone, or you won't like what happens next." Sierra leaned in, reading the message, her brow furrowing. "That's a setup, Brody. Whoever sent that knows you've got Echo. They want you out there, isolated." Brody's jaw hardened, eyes narrowing at the words. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters like something trying to claw its way inside. Echo pressed close against his leg, growling low, the sound deep and unending, a warning carried straight from instinct. Brody's pulse steadied. "Then we'll give them what they want," he said quietly. "But on our terms." The night around Flagstaff was razor-sharp and silent, the cold slicing clean through the pines that lined the eastern ridges. Clouds crawled across the sky, swallowing the moonlight and casting the land into long, uncertain shadows. Out beyond town, the ground dipped into a forgotten valley known as Horseshoe Creek, once a picnic spot, now a half-abandoned stretch of rock and gravel where silence felt heavier than air. The creek itself was little more than a dry curve of pale stones glinting faintly beneath a shroud of frost. Brody Tanner moved along the narrow dirt path that led toward the bend. His boots made no sound against the frozen ground. Echo walked tight beside him, muscles coiled, the faint rhythm of his breathing the only sound between them. The Marine's hand brushed the dog's harness, feeling the faint tremor of anticipation. "Stay close, boy," he murmured. "Tonight we finish this." Up ahead, a pair of faint red lights blinked once, twice, then vanished into the dark. Detective Jonah Briggs stepped out from behind a boulder, face shadowed under his cap. Even in the dim light, his expression was hard as carved stone. "They took the bait," he said quietly. "Message went through the burner exactly as you sent it. They think you're alone." Brody nodded once. "Then let's make them believe it." The plan was simple but precise, a silent sting, baited by deception. Two young officers, Leon Ramos and Dana Keller, were already positioned high on the ridge above the creek bed, rifles ready, radios muted. They had orders to stay low until Briggs signaled with 3 short flashes of a red tactical light. Brody and Echo moved into position near the center of the dry creek, standing within the wide crescent of stone. The cold bit deep. Echo's breath came in white plumes, his amber eyes alert and unblinking. Brody adjusted the dog's harness, voice low but calm. "Down. Hold. Wait." Echo obeyed instantly, lowering into a poised crouch, head lifted, ears pricked. Then, the faint hum of an engine. A pair of headlights flickered through the trees before cutting out completely. The echo of car doors slamming followed, the sound rolling off the canyon walls like thunder. From the shadows, she appeared. Mara Roland. Even here, in the cold, in the dark, she looked immaculate. A fitted wool coat clung to her frame, the pale fabric ghostly under the muted moonlight. Her blonde hair glinted like glass, perfectly arranged. Her face, sharp and controlled, wore a smile too polished to be human. But her eyes, they were shards of ice. She stepped forward with the slow grace of someone who believed the world was still hers to command. Her heels clicked against the stones, a sound that didn't belong in the wilderness. Behind her, 3 men emerged from the dark, hired muscle, the kind with faces built for trouble. The first was a heavy-set man, bald, with a serpent tattoo coiling up his neck. The second was tall and twitchy, his shoulders jerking with every sound. The third, younger but scarred, carried himself with the arrogance of someone who hadn't yet learned fear. In Mara's right hand, half hidden by her sleeve, a glint of metal caught Brody's eye, the narrow cylinder of a tranquilizer syringe. She stopped 10 yards away. Her voice carried across the empty creek, sharp and deliberate. "Mr. Tanner," she called. "You've taken something that doesn't belong to you. That animal is dangerous, he's already hurt people. Hand him over, and we can all go home unharmed." Brody didn't move. The wind stirred faintly between them. "Funny," he said finally, his tone flat. "The only danger here is the truth you've been running from." Echo's growl rolled low through the air, deep, steady, and controlled. Mara's lips curved into a cold smile. She lifted one gloved hand, feigning calm, while the other tightened around the hidden syringe. "You don't understand," she said sweetly. "That dog was never right. He remembers too much." The men began to spread out, 2 to her left, 1 circling right. Boots crunched against the gravel. Brody's eyes flicked briefly to the ridge. He could almost feel Briggs waiting, every second a stretched thread. He brushed his thumb against the small red light clipped inside his pocket. Mara's smile slipped into something sharper. "Last chance, Mr. Tanner. Give me the dog, or—" 3 crimson flashes streaked across the rocks. The night erupted. "Police! Drop your weapons!" Briggs's voice thundered from above, echoing through the valley as beams of tactical lights swept across the scene. Chaos broke loose in an instant. The bald thug lunged first, yanking a rusted pipe from beneath his coat. He swung, a wide, reckless arc. Brody sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist, twisted hard, and slammed him face first into the stones. The pipe clattered away. Echo moved with him, not attacking but shielding, body low, teeth bared but restrained. The shepherd's stance was defensive, his weight pressed firmly against Brody's leg, guarding rather than striking. Up on the ridge, Officer Ramos descended fast, shouting commands, his sidearm leveled. The second thug froze, knife glinting midair before it hit the ground. The third man tried to bolt, only to be met by Officer Keller, who emerged from the brush like a shadow, weapon raised, voice calm but commanding. "Don't even think about it." Mara stood frozen in the spotlight's glare, every ounce of her composure cracking. Her hand still clutched the syringe, the needle catching the light. "Drop it!" Briggs shouted. Her voice came out brittle. "You don't understand, he's mine. That dog." The sharp click of handcuffs cut her off. Briggs stepped forward, face grim, snapping the cuffs around her wrists with practiced precision. The moonlight caught on her once perfect curls as they came undone. The facade was gone, all the charm, the control, stripped away, leaving only the hollow underneath. Around them, the air was still again. Brody knelt beside Echo, his hand resting gently along the dog's neck. The shepherd trembled once, then pressed closer, amber eyes fixed on him. "It's over, boy," Brody whispered. "We've got her." For the first time that night, the cold no longer seemed to matter. The Coconino County Courthouse stood like a stone sentinel on Birch Avenue, its sandstone facade etched with years of desert wind and frost. Morning sunlight slanted through the tall arched windows, illuminating the quiet murmur of a crowd that had gathered to witness justice unfold. Inside, the air felt heavy with expectation, a blend of polished wood, old paper, and the quiet rustle of people waiting to see if power would finally bend before truth. At the front of the courtroom sat Brody Tanner, shoulders square, expression unreadable. At his feet lay Echo, calm and alert, his black and tan coat shining softly in the golden light. Though faint scars still mapped his body like ghosted reminders of pain, there was peace now in his steady gaze. Each sound in the courtroom, the shuffle of shoes, the tap of pens, the quiet coughs, made Echo's ears flick. But he stayed pressed against Brody's boots, breathing slow, grounded by the steady presence of the man who had saved him. Across the room, Mara Roland sat at the defense table. Her perfection had fractured. The once impeccable curls now hung loose around her face. Her crimson lipstick couldn't disguise the tremor in her jaw. Yet, she tried to hold on to the remnants of poise, chin lifted, eyes flashing like trapped glass. Her husband, John Roland, sat several seats away, pale and hollow-eyed. When the judge entered, Margaret Fletcher, a silver-haired woman in her 60s whose eyes carried the weight of decades spent sorting lies from truth, the room rose. Her presence alone silenced every whisper. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. The prosecution's first witness was Dr. Ellen Cartwright, the county veterinarian. She walked to the stand with a steady step, a woman in her late 50s, square-shouldered, her iron-gray hair twisted into a bun that didn't move when she spoke. Her glasses caught the light as she looked toward the jury. She explained in simple, unwavering terms what she had found during her examination of Echo. "The scars encircling his chest and legs are consistent with prolonged bindings," she said, holding up medical photos. "These marks," she pointed with a gloved finger, "weren't made in a day. They formed over time from repeated restraint." The jury leaned in. Even from where he sat, Brody could see them flinch when the images appeared on the screen. Dr. Cartwright continued, voice firm but steady. The muzzle injuries show signs of fabric abrasion, likely caused by tight wrapping. The teeth marks indicate attempts to chew free. These are not accidents. These are the physical remnants of long-term abuse. The judge's gaze moved briefly to Mara. The woman's lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers white around the arms of her chair. Next came Dr. Kevin Lyle, an animal behavior specialist from Phoenix. He was tall and lean, with kind brown eyes and the soft drawl of someone who spoke with patience for both people and creatures. He crouched slightly near the witness box as Echo was guided closer, studying the shepherd from a respectful distance. This dog, he began, gesturing gently toward Echo, should, by age and breed, display confidence and balanced behavior. What we see instead are patterns of conditioned fear, trembling at sharp sounds, freezing at raised voices, and, notably, reacting to the sound of heels striking hard floors. That's a learned trauma response. He looked directly at the jury. The remarkable part, he added softly, is that despite it all, this dog shows restraint. Loyalty. It tells us his heart wasn't broken, just bruised. It's not the product of good training. It's the resilience of a soul that refused to give up. The courtroom was silent. A few people in the back rows wiped at their eyes. The next piece of evidence came not from a witness, but from the journal, the same one found beneath the curved staircase of the old Roland house. Projected on the courtroom screen were the handwritten words of John Roland's first wife, her entries documenting her growing fear of Mara. If John will not see, I must leave before she destroys us both. She has turned even Echo into a tool for her cruelty. The diary's looping script seemed to echo through the still room. Then came the financial records, bank transfers, false invoices, and withdrawal slips tied to Mara's signature. The timeline matched perfectly with the garage fire that had supposedly killed John's first wife. The defense lawyer tried to object, but Judge Fletcher raised a single hand. Overruled, she said coolly. The pattern of evidence is directly relevant. Mara shifted in her seat, the polished veneer of her expression cracking further. Finally, Detective Briggs took the stand. He moved with quiet confidence, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. He laid out the final piece, an audio recording, recovered from Mara's own vehicle, where a hidden recorder had captured a conversation between her and one of the hired men. Briggs pressed play. The speakers crackled for a moment. Then came Mara's voice, unmistakable, sharp, cold. Make it disappear. That dog smells too well. I don't care how. Just finish it. The room went still. The faint hiss of the recording seemed to stretch into eternity. Then, the rustle of a checkbook. The unmistakable slide of money changing hands. Mara shot to her feet. That's not, she began, voice rising, but her lawyer pulled her back down, face pale with defeat. Judge Fletcher didn't even look up from her notes. Sit down, Mrs. Roland. Brody could feel Echo tense at his feet when that voice played, the same voice that had haunted the dog's past. His ears flattened, tail tucked, muscles trembling. Brody bent down, pressing a steady hand over Echo's back. Easy, boy, he whispered softly. She can't hurt you anymore. The shepherd exhaled, leaning his head gently against Brody's leg. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it spoke louder than all the testimonies combined. The jury noticed. So did the judge. The final witness was John Roland himself. He took the stand reluctantly, his once confident posture replaced by hollow guilt. His voice trembled as he spoke. I knew things weren't right. But I didn't want to see it. I thought if I ignored it, it would stop. That silence would somehow keep the peace. He paused, eyes red. I failed my wife. I failed that dog. And I failed myself. No one moved. The truth had finally spoken, too late but undeniable. When both sides rested, Judge Fletcher's closing instructions were brief but powerful. "The law is not blind to cruelty," she said, her voice resonant. "But justice depends on courage, from those willing to speak for those who cannot." The jury filed out. The minutes crawled into hours. And then, they returned. The foreman stood, voice steady as he read the verdicts. On the charge of aggravated animal cruelty, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit a crime, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. A wave of sound rippled through the courtroom, gasps, murmurs, sighs of relief. Mara's composure shattered completely. "This is madness," she cried. "You don't know what that animal did." The bailiff, a broad-shouldered officer with kind eyes, gently but firmly guided her back into her chair as the judge's gavel struck wood. John Roland received a suspended sentence, stripped of all financial guardianship and forbidden from ever owning an animal again. When the judgment was read, he simply bowed his head, defeated. At Brody's feet, Echo shifted, lifting his head. The dog's amber eyes met his, steady, trusting, unafraid. Slowly, he pressed his muzzle against Brody's thigh. Brody's throat tightened. He rested his palm on the dog's head, feeling the warmth of life and redemption beneath his hand. Around them, the sound of shuffling papers and whispered voices faded away. For Brody Tanner, the only thing that mattered was the slow sigh that escaped Echo's chest, the sound of release, of peace finally found. The chapter of cruelty had ended. But another, one built on trust, courage, and grace, was only beginning. Winter melted slowly in Flagstaff that year. The first signs of spring came quietly, a trickle of meltwater beneath the pines, the scent of thawing earth, and the faint shimmer of sunlight glinting through patches of ice. The cold was still there, but softer now, as if even the forest itself was learning how to breathe again. Brody Tanner stood on the porch of his cabin, the same one where months earlier, he had carried a broken German shepherd out of the darkness and into the light. Now, Echo lay stretched on the sun-warmed boards beside him, his coat thick and healthy, eyes half closed in contentment. The scars were still visible beneath the fur, reminders of a past that could never be erased, but they no longer defined him. They told a story, yes, but not of pain. Of survival. Brody leaned against the railing, sipping his coffee, the morning mist rising off the forest like smoke. A faint breeze stirred the wind chimes, and for the first time in a long while, silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt whole. The Coconino County K-9 Search and Rescue Division had reached out weeks earlier. They'd heard about the trial, about Echo's instincts, his sharp nose, his calm under pressure. They wanted him on the team, not as a project, but as a partner. Brody had hesitated at first. He didn't want to push the dog too soon. But when he'd mentioned it to Echo, the shepherd had perked up instantly, tail thumping once, eyes bright with understanding. And so, they began training again, side by side. Echo took to the work naturally. His focus was precise, his sense of purpose palpable. Where once there had been trembling, now there was confidence. His gait was fluid, his ears high, his eyes fixed on Brody like the world existed only through that bond. The first time he located a lost hiker during a mock exercise, Echo barked once, sharp, triumphant, and Brody swore he saw pride in those amber eyes. Sierra Gwen, ever the pragmatist, had shown up to watch their certification test. She stood with her hands in her jacket pockets, shaking her head in disbelief when Echo found the missing volunteer in under 4 minutes. "Tanner," she said, grinning, "if that dog gets any better, you'll be out of a job." Brody smirked faintly. "Wouldn't be the worst thing." Sierra laughed, the sound easy, light. For a moment, the shadows that had hung over them both seemed to lift completely. News of Echo's transformation spread beyond the county line. A local journalist from the Flagstaff Chronicle ran a feature titled, "From Chains to Courage, the Shepherd Who Refused to Break." The story went viral, not because it was sensational, but because it was real. People wrote letters, donations poured into shelters, and volunteers signed up to foster abused animals. The story of one Marine and one dog had become a message far larger than either of them. And somewhere deep in the northern pines, under a sky wide enough to hold both scars and hope, Brody and Echo simply kept moving forward. One evening, months later, Brody found himself walking the forest trail near the cabin, the air humming with the soft buzz of crickets. Echo padded ahead, sniffing along the mossy ground. The sun dipped low behind the ridgeline, turning the horizon to molten gold. They reached the clearing, the same one where Brody had first found him tied to that rusted pipe. The forest had grown around the wound, the grass was thicker now, the soil no longer barren. Nature had done what it always did, it healed. Brody crouched, brushing his hand across the soft earth. Echo sat beside him, quiet and still, eyes scanning the horizon. "You remember this spot, don't you, boy?" Brody said softly. The shepherd leaned against him, the warmth of his body grounding the moment. Brody smiled faintly. "You made it home." Echo lifted his head, gazed steady on his companion, as if to say we both did. For a long time, neither moved. The wind drifted through the branches, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Somewhere, a hawk called across the valley. And then, a sound that wasn't from the forest. The faint buzz of a radio clipped to Brody's vest. "Rescue Unit 2, came Briggs's voice, calm and familiar even through the static. "We've got a missing hiker reported near the ridge. You up for a run?" Brody's lips curved into a small smile. He rose, patting Echo's shoulder. "You heard the man." The shepherd's ears perked instantly, tail wagging once in sharp anticipation. Within minutes, they were in the truck, tires crunching over gravel, the sun dipping behind them as twilight spread through the trees. The world blurred by in shades of gold and gray, and the radio crackled again with coordinates. Brody reached across the console, resting his hand briefly on Echo's neck. "Another chance to do some good, huh?" Echo barked once, clear, strong, unbroken. Hours later, as the moon rose high and silver over the peaks, Brody and Echo stood together at the forest's edge, flashlights slicing through mist and shadow. Somewhere ahead, a frightened voice called faintly for help, and Echo surged forward, nose to the ground, every muscle alive with purpose. Brody followed close behind, his own breath steady, matching the rhythm of the dog's stride. Step for step. Heart for heart. Man and dog, bound not by command, but by trust. And as the darkness thinned before them, it wasn't just a lost hiker they were chasing. It was the light, the kind that comes after everything else has burned away, the kind that means healing, redemption, and home. The story that began in pain had found its ending in purpose. And as the first hint of dawn touched the ridgeline, Brody Tanner knew, some rescues never really end. They simply begin again.